The desert stretched endlessly under the harsh sun, a vast expanse of golden sand, jagged rocks, and sparse scrub. The air shimmered in the heat, and the only sound was the faint whistle of the wind. Navy SEALs stationed at a temporary checkpoint along the desolate highway had grown accustomed to the monotony of such missions. Most days were quiet, filled with nothing more dangerous than the occasional civilian or truck passing through. But today, the horizon held something unusual, something that would shatter the team's sense of routine and leave a lesson none of them would forget. It started as a tiny cloud of dust in the distance, growing steadily larger until the outline of a pickup truck became clear. It was an old vehicle, ancient even by desert standards, rusted along the edges, the paint faded and chipped. The engine rattled and coughed as if it might collapse under its own weight at any moment. The tires were mismatched, one appearing patched with some makeshift material, and the headlights were dulled with years of dirt. "Checkpoint, got a visitor," muttered Chief Petty Officer Harris, the team leader, squinting into the distance. His tone was calm, but his experienced eyes narrowed. Something about the truck struck him as off. "Looks like a farmer's truck," said Petty Officer Daniels, younger and newer to the desert operations. He waved dismissively. "Probably just hauling supplies through. Nothing we need to worry about." But the closer it got, the stranger it looked. Dust kicked up by the tires trailed behind it in chaotic clouds, and yet the truck seemed to move with a deliberate steadiness, almost as if it had a purpose far beyond carrying crates or feed. The driver, a man who appeared to be in his late 60s, sat upright, shoulders stiff, hands gripping the wheel with calm precision. His skin was weathered, darkened by years of sun, and his eyes, hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, were unreadable, cold, focused, and utterly calm. "Hey, stop!" Harris called through the megaphone as the truck slowed slightly near the checkpoint. The SEALs readied themselves, weapons holstered but hands close to the triggers. Routine procedure was simple: identify, question, and move on. Most drivers complied quickly. Most drivers were harmless. The truck slowed but didn't stop. The old man's eyes met Harris's, unflinching, unshaken. A small bead of sweat ran down Harris's temple. "Sir, please pull over for inspection," he commanded again. The man's voice was soft but deliberate. "I don't have time. I'm on schedule." That wasn't an acceptable answer. Harris motioned for Daniels and the other SEALs to prepare to intercept the vehicle. The tension in the air was palpable. Something about the man's calm defiance unnerved them. They had trained for hostile situations, ambushes, and combat with high-risk targets, but this was a puzzle. Daniels moved toward the truck as it rolled to a stop just beyond the checkpoint, kicking up sand that stung his eyes. The truck's bed was hidden beneath a dusty tarp, tied down with fraying ropes. Its contents were impossible to guess, though the weight made it sag unnaturally low on the rear axle. "Sir, I need to see what's in your truck," Harris said firmly, stepping closer. "Identification, please." The man handed over a worn leather wallet. Inside was an ID that didn't make sense, a faded photograph, a name Harris didn't recognize, and a military-style emblem stamped on the corner. The date of birth, over 70 years ago. Harris blinked. This man was old, older than any retired operative or veteran he had dealt with in routine checks. "Sir, what is your destination?" Harris asked. "I'm just passing through," the man replied, calm, almost bored. His voice had a quiet authority that made Harris pause. It wasn't commanding, it was simply confident, as though he expected compliance by default. The SEALs exchanged uneasy glances. They had dealt with smugglers, traffickers, and armed militants, but never someone who carried himself like this, completely unshaken. The man wasn't nervous. He wasn't evasive. He was untouchable. "Mind if we check the truck?" Daniels asked, gesturing toward the tarp. The man's eyes flickered briefly, just a micro-expression, and then he shook his head. "I prefer you don't." Harris felt a spike of irritation. "Sir, I'm going to have to insist. It's protocol." The old man sighed, almost in disappointment, and said nothing further. He did not argue, did not resist physically, but the way he held himself, the stillness of his posture, made the seals hesitate. There was a strange weight about the man, a presence they couldn't ignore. "Fine," Harris muttered, motioning for the team to proceed with a search. "But be quick." Daniels and two others carefully lifted the tarp, revealing a duffel bag that was worn, its corners frayed and covered in dust. Harris frowned. No crates, no food, no supplies, just one duffel. Its size suggested it could contain personal items or perhaps weapons, but they had no way of knowing yet. "Open it," Harris ordered. Daniels unzipped the bag. Inside were strange, seemingly random items: faded military medals, old dog tags with an unfamiliar call sign, and a neatly sealed envelope marked in bold letters. "Classified." Harris froze. "What the hell is this?" The old man watched silently, unblinking. There was no panic in his eyes, no anger, only the faintest trace of disappointment. Harris radioed their command for instructions, his voice tight. "We have a situation, subject is non-compliant. Truck contains potentially classified materials. Guidance requested." The response came quickly, but it was unusual. "Do not open the envelope. Do not question further. Maintain position. Await further orders." The SEALs looked at each other in disbelief. This was no ordinary stop. This was no ordinary man. They had stumbled onto something far beyond their clearance, something that didn't belong in the desert on a Tuesday morning. The old man shifted slightly, his voice calm and low. "Patience is a soldier's greatest weapon. Use it wisely." Harris swallowed, realizing he had misjudged the situation. This wasn't a simple checkpoint delay. It was the start of an encounter that would change the team's understanding of authority, history, and respect. And for the first time that morning, the SEALs felt genuinely unsettled. They had no idea who they were really dealing with, or how quickly events were about to spiral out of their control. The old truck sat there, dusty and unassuming, hiding secrets that could shake the very foundations of the SEALs' training. One wrong move, one question too many, and they could lose everything. But for now, all they could do was wait and wonder. The sun climbed higher, beating down relentlessly on the checkpoint. The desert air shimmered, carrying with it the dry scent of dust and heat. The SEALs remained on edge, glancing at the old truck and its silent occupant. The man hadn't moved since they had opened his duffel. He sat straight-backed in the driver's seat, hands folded on his lap, eyes calm yet piercing. He didn't flinch when Harris approached. He didn't fidget. He didn't even breathe audibly. He just existed in the moment, like he had nothing to fear and perhaps nothing to lose. "Sir," Harris began, trying to maintain authority, "we need to know where you're headed. It's standard procedure. This is for everyone's safety." The man finally responded, his voice measured and quiet but filled with an unspoken weight. "I'm on schedule. I have a meeting to attend. It's important." Harris's eyes narrowed. There was something strange about the way he said that, as if the weight of the world followed him, yet he carried it lightly. Daniel stepped closer, trying to read the man's expression. Nothing. Only the faintest shadow of a smile, almost imperceptible, passed over his face before it disappeared again. "Sir," Daniels asked, "do you have identification? Any documents we can verify?" The man produced a wallet from his coat pocket and handed it over. The leather was cracked, worn from years of use. Inside was an ID, but the photograph startled Harris. The man appeared significantly older than any retired veteran they'd encountered on similar assignments, yet the ID seemed official, bearing a military emblem that Harris didn't recognize. His date of birth, over 70 years ago. Harris blinked, trying to make sense of it. 70 years old, and still driving this far into the desert, muttered Daniels under his breath. "Patience, Daniels," Harris snapped, but even he felt a knot of unease in his stomach. Something about the man felt familiar, though he couldn't place it. There was a quiet authority about him that transcended rank or age. The SEALs were trained to recognize threats, to read intentions, But this man defied every instinct. He radiated a calm that unsettled them more than aggression ever could. Harris motioned for the duffel to be brought forward. The other SEALs lifted it carefully, its weight dense and unnerving. There was something inside, something that clearly didn't belong in the back of a rusty pickup on a desert highway. Harris gave the order to open it. Inside were old medals, dog tags with unfamiliar call signs, and a sealed envelope marked classified. The letters were bold and precise, the type of seal reserved for items of extreme importance. The SEALs exchanged glances, and Harris's stomach tightened. This was no ordinary checkpoint stop. This was something much larger, something potentially explosive. "Command," Harris spoke into the radio, his voice steady but tight. "We've detained a subject. Truck contains materials marked classified. Request guidance." The reply was brief but tense. "Do not open the envelope. Do not question the subject further. Maintain position. Await further instructions." The SEALs were stunned. Instructions like these didn't come lightly. This was not a simple checkpoint violation. They had stumbled onto someone or something far above their clearance, and they had no idea what consequences might follow. The old man shifted slightly, his eyes scanning each of the SEALs as though assessing them. Then he spoke, softly but clearly. "Patience is a soldier's greatest weapon. Use it wisely." Harris felt a shiver run down his spine. The man's calmness, his control over the situation, even his cryptic words, everything was unsettling. They had trained for years to anticipate threats, yet this man made them feel like novices. Daniel stepped closer to Harris. "Sir, do you think he's armed?" he whispered. Harris shook his head. "I don't know, Daniels, but it doesn't matter. Right now our job is to follow orders." The old man continued to sit, silent except for the occasional glance. There was no fear, no anxiety, only an almost imperceptible awareness that unnerved everyone. He seemed to understand the situation better than the team themselves. Harris tried to read him, to anticipate his next move, but there was nothing. The old man was a wall of calm in a storm of tension. Minutes stretched into nearly half an hour. The SEALs maintained their positions, their eyes flicking constantly between the truck, the man, and the duffel bag. The silence was oppressive. Sweat dripped down their foreheads under the relentless sun, their nerves taut. Then suddenly, a faint hum of engines in the distance caught their attention. Harris tensed, signaling for everyone to stay alert. Dust began to rise on the horizon, moving faster than the old truck ever had. The SEALs instinctively reached for their weapons, scanning the approaching disturbance. The old man finally spoke again, his voice calm, almost amused. "They're coming." Harris froze. "Coming who?" The man did not answer. He merely stared ahead, hands folded neatly on his lap, eyes calm. There was a knowledge in them, an experience that Harris could not comprehend. The SEALs exchanged uneasy glances. Something was approaching, and they were about to be caught off guard. The engines grew louder, closer. Harris's heart rate increased, adrenaline surging. "All teams, positions," he barked, signaling the squad to take defensive stances. Every muscle in their bodies tensed, every instinct firing. They had no idea what they were about to face, but they were trained to react. The man in the truck remained calm, almost detached, as though he were watching a predictable sequence unfold. Harris's unease deepened. He had seen fear before in civilians and combatants alike, but this calmness, this certainty, was something he had never encountered. "Sir, what's going on?" Daniels asked, voice tight with tension. Harris shook his head. "I don't know, Daniels, but I have a feeling we just made a mistake stopping him." The SEALs readied themselves. The old man remained silent, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the approaching engines kicked up clouds of sand. There was no anger, no panic, no urgency in his manner, just a quiet confidence that unnerved every SEAL. For the first time that day, Harris realized the magnitude of their actions. This wasn't just a routine checkpoint stop. This wasn't just a hesitant old man. They had stumbled into something far bigger than themselves, something that would test their judgment, their patience, and their understanding of authority. And as the vehicles drew closer, Harris understood that they were on the precipice of an encounter none of them would ever forget. The calm stranger in the old truck wasn't just a man. He was the center of a storm they could not yet see. The engines had faded slightly in the distance, leaving a tense silence at the checkpoint. The SEALs remained alert, hands hovering near their holsters, eyes flicking constantly between the old truck and the surrounding desert. The man in the pickup had not moved. He remained calm, almost serene, as if he understood everything unfolding around him far better than anyone else. His composure unnerved the team. They had trained for hostile encounters, ambushes, and life-or-death situations, but this was different. There was no threat in his posture, yet a storm of implications lay hidden beneath the surface. Harris stepped closer, signaling for Daniels and the other SEALs to stay vigilant. "We need to check the duffel more thoroughly," he said. "Whatever is in that bag, it isn't ordinary." Daniels nodded, trying to hide the unease in his expression. He knelt beside the bag and unzipped it carefully, the zipper protesting with a faint squeak. Inside, the contents were revealed. Metals, tarnished yet polished in parts, glinting in the harsh desert sunlight, dog tags with an unfamiliar call sign, and the envelope neatly sealed and marked with bold, ominous letters, "Classified." Harris felt his pulse quicken. This was no random assortment of military memorabilia. The bag smelled faintly of leather, metal, and old paper, a combination that carried the weight of decades. Each item seemed to whisper stories of missions long past, battles fought, and lives saved or lost. Daniels picked up one of the medals, turning it over in his hands. It bore insignias he recognized, but not in this combination. "I've never seen this before," he muttered. His voice was tight with tension. Harris, scanning the surrounding desert for threats, muttered, "Keep your focus, Daniels. This isn't a history lesson, it's a warning." The old man, still seated with hands folded neatly, finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost amused. "You found a fraction of what I carry. Curiosity is admirable, but timing is everything." Harris froze. "Timing? What are you talking about?" The man did not answer directly. He merely stared ahead, eyes steady, unblinking. There was something about him, something in the calm certainty of his demeanor, that made Harris realize they were in over their heads. This wasn't just an old man with relics. He was someone who had lived, seen, and done things far beyond the SEALs' understanding. The team radio crackled, interrupting the tense moment. "SEAL checkpoint message from command," the voice said. "Do not touch the envelope. Do not question further. Maintain position. Await further instructions. Repeat, do not engage further." Harris's heart sank. This was serious. The envelope alone, sealed and marked as classified, carried a weight that he could fathom. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a symbol of authority, history, and secrecy that went beyond the SEAL's clearance. Daniels glanced at Harris, his face pale. "Sir, we could be in real trouble here." Harris nodded grimly. "I know, but right now we follow orders. We do not touch the envelope, and we do not provoke him." The old man tilted his head slightly, as if acknowledging Harris's realization. "Most young soldiers forget that patience can save lives," he said quietly. "Judgment without understanding is a dangerous weapon." Harris swallowed hard. He had seen fear, bravery, and desperation, but nothing like the weight behind this man's words. There was a lifetime of experience behind them, a subtle command for respect. The SEALs instinctively straightened, aware that every movement, every glance might be scrutinized. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The desert sun climbed higher, casting a relentless glare over the checkpoint. The old man remained seated, composed, yet somehow commanding the entire space with his presence alone. The SEALs shifted uneasily, uncomfortable with the realization that their routine operation had turned into a situation beyond their control. Then Harris noticed something unusual in the duffel. Alongside the medals and envelope were a series of photographs, carefully stacked and slightly yellowed with age. He picked one up, examining it closely. It showed a younger version of the old man, standing with a group of men in military fatigues. Their expressions were solemn, almost heroic. A faint caption read, "Operation Silent Storm, 1987. Harris's breath caught. He had heard of the operation in training briefings, but he had never known the names of the field operatives. The faces in the photo matched those he had studied in theory only, and standing at the center of the image, younger but unmistakable, was the man sitting before him now. Daniels leaned over, whispering, "Sir, this is him. He led this operation. He's a legend." Harris felt a mixture of awe and fear. They had stopped a man who had become a living legend in their circles, a figure whose missions had shaped the very structure of modern military operations. Yet here he was, in a beat-up truck, silent and seemingly ordinary, as if decades of accolades and heroics meant nothing to him. The old man's gaze finally met Harris's directly. "Recognition is fleeting," he said quietly. "Respect is earned in every action, not given for titles or medals." Harris's throat tightened. He realized with a sudden jolt that their judgment had been clouded by assumptions. They had assumed the truck carried nothing of importance. They had assumed the man was an ordinary civilian, and those assumptions had nearly led them into a situation they couldn't control. The distant hum of engines returned, louder this time. Harris's eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon. Something was approaching, faster and more urgent than before. The desert, vast and empty, now seemed alive with tension. "Team," Harris ordered, his voice firm, "hold your positions. Don't make any moves until I give the command." The old man's lips curved into a faint smile, almost imperceptible. "They are coming," he said, "and your timing will soon be tested." The SEALs stiffened, understanding the weight of his words. This was no ordinary checkpoint delay. This was a moment that would define the rest of their day and perhaps their careers. Harris felt a deep sense of unease. They had stumbled upon someone whose presence alone commanded attention, whose history alone demanded respect. And yet, the old man remained calm, detached, almost playful in his quiet defiance. For the first time, Harris realized that this encounter was about far more than protocol, rules, or training. This was an encounter with history itself, and the SEALs were unprepared. Every lesson they had learned, every instinct they had honed, suddenly seemed insufficient against the quiet authority of the man in the old truck. And as the engines grew louder, signaling the approach of vehicles from the horizon, Harris understood one terrifying truth. The situation was about to escalate far beyond anything they had anticipated. They had entered the orbit of someone extraordinary, and their actions in the next moments could carry consequences they could not yet imagine. The old man's calmness was a stark contrast to the adrenaline surging through the SEALs. And in that silence, the desert seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. Harris took a deep breath, signaling the team to prepare for the inevitable. They were about to learn, in a single hour, that assumptions could be dangerous, and that even the most ordinary appearances could hide the most extraordinary truths. The desert sun blazed mercilessly, painting the checkpoint in a golden haze. Dust swirled lazily around the old truck, settling on the sand, on the SEALs' fatigues, and on the duffel that had revealed its cryptic contents. The team remained on high alert, every sense stretched taut. They knew the man in the truck was no ordinary traveler, yet nothing in their training had prepared them for the calm authority he exuded. His silence was more unnerving than any verbal threat could have been. He seemed untouchable, and the knowledge of that fact gnawed at them. Harris's hand hovered near his radio as he tried to maintain composure. "Command," he said carefully, "we are holding the subject. He is cooperative mostly. The duffel contains medals, dog tags, and a sealed envelope labeled classified. We require guidance before proceeding." The response came, but it was unlike any the SEALs had ever received. The voice over the radio was tight, urgent, almost strained. Do not open the envelope. Do not question the subject further. Maintain position. Await further instructions. This is not a drill. Repeat, do not engage further. The SEALs exchanged uneasy glances. A tension hung in the air, heavier than the desert heat itself. They had expected some bureaucratic response or routine confirmation, not a command that carried the weight of unspoken consequences. Harris's jaw tightened. This wasn't just a matter of protocol anymore. Something was happening, something beyond their comprehension. Daniel swallowed hard, looking at the old man with growing uncertainty. "Sir, what do you think is going on?" Harris shook his head slowly. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's bigger than us." The old man, sensing their unease, finally spoke. His voice was low, calm, and carried a weight that silenced the checkpoint. "You have acted correctly according to procedure," he said. "But procedure is not always enough. Judgment, patience, and understanding are required for what comes next." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, he's not just calm, he's untouchable. It's like he knows exactly what's about to happen." Harris swallowed. "Yes, and we're about to find out." The distant roar of engines began again, growing steadily louder. Dust kicked up from the horizon, obscuring the view of the approaching vehicles. Harris motioned for his team to tighten formation, each SEAL taking up defensive positions with practiced precision. The old man didn't flinch. He remained seated, composed, watching the horizon as if he had expected the arrival all along. Minutes passed, each one stretching into what felt like an eternity. The desert, once silent and indifferent, now felt charged, alive with anticipation. The SEALs knew that whatever was approaching could change everything. Then the radio crackled again. This time it wasn't just instructions, it was a direct, almost urgent warning. "Checkpoint teams, the subject is of the highest clearance. Do not engage. Do not attempt to detain or delay further. Stand down and maintain position. Authority above 4-star level en route. Confirm understanding." Harris felt the words sink into his chest like a weight. "Highest clearance, authority above 4-star," he repeated, almost to himself. The SEALs froze. They had dealt with sensitive material, top-secret missions, and classified operations. But this was unprecedented. Daniel swallowed hard. "Sir, are you saying this guy he's—" Harris didn't answer immediately. He watched the old man, nodding, the calm composure in his eyes, the faint glint of amusement on his face. "Yes," Harris finally said, his voice low. "He is more than anyone on this team can fully understand, and we have no idea what's coming next." The old man finally spoke again, his words deliberate and slow. "Fear is natural," he said. "Respect is earned, and judgment without patience leads to failure. You have acted with procedure, but procedure alone does not ensure success." Harris's pulse quickened. Every instinct in his body screamed that they were standing on the edge of something monumental. He glanced at his team, noticing the mixture of awe, confusion, and apprehension reflected in their faces. The desert heat, the unrelenting sun, the quiet tension, it all felt like the calm before a storm. Then the rumble of engines grew louder, sharper, more urgent. A cloud of dust approached at high speed, and the SEALs could just make out the outlines of multiple vehicles, sleek black SUVs, heavily armored military plates, and moving with a precision that indicated urgency. This was no ordinary convoy. The SEALs instinctively moved to form a perimeter, weapons ready, scanning every angle, yet their attention kept returning to the calm figure in the truck. The old man's lips curved into a faint smile, almost imperceptible. "They are close," he said softly, "and your patience will be tested." Harris swallowed hard. He had trained for countless scenarios, but nothing prepared him for the weight of authority, history, and secrecy that the man embodied. Every nerve in his body screamed that they were on the precipice of witnessing something extraordinary. Minutes later, the leading SUV of the convoy broke through the dust cloud, its engines roaring, tires kicking up sand. Harris signaled for his team to maintain position. The SUV came to a stop just beyond the old truck, and the door opened with a mechanical precision that demanded attention. Out stepped a man in uniform, every detail immaculate, radiating authority. Harris's jaw tightened as he recognized the insignia, a four-star general. But even the general's commanding presence seemed to pale compared to the calm authority of the old man in the truck. The SEALs instinctively snapped to attention, their movements precise and almost reflexive. The general's eyes scanned the scene, sharp and calculating. He paused briefly, his gaze landing on the old man, and then the unthinkable happened. He saluted. The SEALs froze, stunned. Generals do not salute civilians or men outside their chain of command. Yet the old man returned the salute, calm and deliberate, as though acknowledging a shared history, a mutual respect forged long before any of the SEALs had been born. Harris felt a mixture of awe and unease. The situation had escalated far beyond routine procedure. They had detained a man whose presence alone commanded reverence, whose history and authority surpassed anything they had ever encountered. The old man finally spoke, not to the SEALs but to the general. "You are late," he said quietly, almost teasingly. The words carried weight, authority, and a hint of amusement. The general's expression hardened, but there was recognition in his eyes. "You've kept them waiting," he replied, his voice sharp, precise. Then, turning to Harris and the team, he barked, "Step aside. You have detained the wrong man." The SEALs felt their stomachs drop. They had misjudged, miscalculated, and possibly endangered themselves simply by following routine. The old man's calm demeanor now seemed almost otherworldly, as though he had anticipated every step they had taken. Harris swallowed, feeling a deep mix of fear, respect, and humiliation. They had stopped a man whose actions, missions, and decisions had shaped history in ways they could barely comprehend. And now, the consequences of their assumptions were about to become painfully clear. The convoy remained in position, engines idling, a silent force of authority. The old man remained seated in the truck, composed, yet the aura around him had shifted. It was no longer merely calm, it was commanding, undeniable. The SEALs realized with growing dread that they had stumbled into the orbit of someone whose life and legacy exceeded everything they had been trained to handle. And in that tense desert silence, with the sun beating down and the dust settling around them, the SEALs understood a single, terrifying truth. Assumptions can be dangerous. Patience is a weapon, and sometimes the quietest people carry the heaviest histories. Harris looked at his team, his voice low but firm. "Prepare yourselves. This is about to get very real." The old man's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "And your judgment will be tested," he said softly, "in ways you cannot yet imagine." The desert wind kicked up again, carrying sand, tension, and the echo of history. The checkpoint had become the stage for a revelation that would redefine respect, authority, and the meaning of control. The SEALs knew, in that moment, that everything they thought they understood about procedure, protocol, and power was about to be rewritten by the presence of one extraordinary man. The sun had reached its zenith, casting harsh, unrelenting light across the desolate desert checkpoint. Dust swirled lazily over the sand, shimmering in the heat, while the old truck sat almost like a relic in the middle of the barren landscape. The SEALs had been tense for nearly 2 hours, their training and discipline stretched to the breaking point. Their focus was absolute, eyes scanning the horizon, fingers poised near triggers, minds racing through scenarios, but none of them could predict what was about to happen. From the distance came the unmistakable roar of engines, a deep and urgent rumble that rattled the senses. The convoy approached rapidly, a cloud of dust rising behind black, armored SUVs that seemed almost to hover over the terrain. Harris signaled his team to hold position, weapons ready but restrained, knowing instinctively that any misstep could have consequences beyond anything they had encountered. As the leading SUV neared, the air seemed to hum with authority. The SEALs instinctively straightened, their bodies tense with anticipation. The black vehicle came to a precise stop just beyond the old truck. The engine cut, leaving a tense silence in its wake, broken only by the distant whistle of the wind and the faint crunch of shifting sand. The door of the SUV opened slowly, deliberately, and out stepped a man whose very presence demanded respect. Uniform immaculate, metals gleaming in the harsh sunlight, posture rigid yet fluid, he moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to command at the highest level. Harris's eyes widened. The insignia on his chest was unmistakable, a four-star general. His boots sank slightly into the sand as he surveyed the scene, every detail of his surroundings registering with precision. For a long moment, neither the SEALs nor the general spoke. The old man remained in his truck, calm, composed, the faintest hint of a smile on his lips. His gaze met the general's directly, steady and unwavering. Time seemed to stretch, the tension almost tangible, the desert itself holding its breath. Then, unexpectedly, the general saluted. The SEALs froze. Generals rarely, if ever, saluted civilians, regardless of circumstance. Yet the old man returned the salute, precise, deliberate, and commanding the same respect back. The moment was surreal. Harris felt his stomach tighten. Every instinct screamed that they had underestimated the magnitude of the man sitting in that rusted truck. "You're late," the old man said quietly, almost teasingly. His words were soft, but every syllable carried authority, history, and a quiet power that seemed to make the desert itself pause. The general's eyes narrowed slightly, but there was recognition there, too, a shared understanding born of experience and a history the SEALs could only guess at. "Circumstances demanded precision," he replied. His voice was firm, controlled, yet tinged with an unspoken respect. Harris motioned for his team to relax slightly, though the tension didn't leave their shoulders. They had no idea how to react. Their training had prepared them for combat, for protocol, for immediate threats, but nothing had prepared them for witnessing two figures whose presence alone commanded obedience and reverence. "Step aside," the general barked at the SEALs. "You've detained the wrong man." Harris felt his heart sink. The realization hit him like a hammer. They had stopped a man whose authority and reputation surpassed everything they had been trained to understand. They had misjudged him based on appearances, assumptions, and routine procedure, and now they were painfully aware of it. The old man climbed slowly out of the truck, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Every step carried purpose. He did not look at the SEALs. He only acknowledged the general with a calm nod, as if decades of experience had prepared him for this exact moment. Harris instinctively stepped forward. "Sir, we—" The old man shook his head slightly. "No apologies are necessary," he said quietly, his voice steady. "Judgment without understanding is the true mistake." Daniels whispered under his breath, barely audible. He's one of the legends. I've read about him, missions we studied in training, he led them all." Harris felt a mix of awe and humiliation. They had treated a living legend like an ordinary traveler, stopping him for minor protocol violations, without recognizing the history behind his calm demeanor. The general approached the old man, stopping just a few feet away. His eyes were sharp, assessing, yet there was respect in his gaze. "You've been delayed," the general said. "We had expected you hours ago." "I was on schedule," the old man replied evenly. His voice carried the quiet authority of someone used to commanding respect without force. Timing is relative when one is measured against history. Harris struggled to comprehend the conversation. It was clear the SEALs were now mere observers in a dialogue whose weight and meaning far exceeded their clearance or understanding. The old man's calm, deliberate words carried significance they could only guess at. The general's expression softened slightly, but his posture remained firm. "You've stopped a team that did not know who they were dealing with," he said, turning slightly to address Harris and the SEALs. "Understand that every action has consequences, and assumptions can be dangerous. This man has saved lives you will never know existed, and missions you were not briefed on. He moves now under authority that surpasses even your commander's clearance." Harris felt the weight of the words sink in. They had unknowingly detained someone whose life and decisions had shaped countless operations, some of which had undoubtedly saved their own lives or those of fellow soldiers. Their mistake was glaring, humiliating, and yet it carried a lesson they would never forget. The old man's eyes met Harris's briefly. There was no anger, only quiet disappointment. "Authority is not proven through force," he said softly. "It is proven through patience, understanding, and discernment. Never forget that." Harris nodded slowly, a deep sense of respect settling in his chest. He realized that this moment, this encounter, would define their understanding of judgment and leadership for the rest of their careers. The general turned back to the old man, who had already begun walking toward the SUV. Harris and his team instinctively stepped back, watching as the legendary figure climbed into the vehicle with ease, his presence undiminished by age or circumstance. The convoy remained in place, engines idling, a silent testament to authority and power. The desert, once oppressive and indifferent, now seemed to pulse with tension, every grain of sand a witness to the historic moment unfolding. Harris exhaled slowly. We underestimated him," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Daniels nodded, still staring in awe. "He's beyond anything we could imagine, a living legend, and we treated him like a civilian." The general addressed Harris one final time before stepping into his own SUV. "This incident will be reviewed. Understand the lessons you have learned here. Judgment, respect, patience. They are not optional." The convoy of black SUVs rolled forward, engines rumbling, dust trailing behind them. The old man sat in the lead vehicle, calm, composed, and commanding even without words. The SEALs watched in silence, the weight of the encounter pressing down on them like the heat of the desert sun. For Harris and his team, the realization was profound. They had been part of a rare moment, witnessing authority, history, and legacy converge in a single man. A man who had lived through extraordinary circumstances, whose actions had shaped lives and missions in ways they would never fully understand. As the SUVs disappeared over the horizon, Harris finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "Team, remember this. Every assumption we make carries consequences. Patience, understanding, respect. These are the tools of survival, far beyond weapons or training. Never forget what you've seen today." The SEALs nodded silently, each processing the encounter in their own way. The old truck remained, now empty and silent, a relic of the extraordinary man who had occupied it for only a brief moment. The desert returned to its oppressive quiet, yet the memory of what had transpired lingered, heavy and indelible. Harris glanced at the horizon where the convoy had vanished, a mix of awe and humility washing over him. They had stopped the wrong man. They had misjudged a legend. And yet, in that moment of recognition and respect, they had also witnessed a lesson that would remain with them for the rest of their lives. Sometimes, the quietest, most unassuming individuals hold the greatest power, the deepest wisdom, and the most extraordinary histories. And for the SEALs, that truth was now impossible to ignore. The desert returned to silence, but the SEALs felt no relief. The black SUVs had vanished over the horizon, leaving only the rattling echo of engines fading into the distance and a cloud of dust settling over the checkpoint. The old truck, now empty, seemed almost ordinary, yet the aura of authority it had carried lingered. Harris stood in the glaring sun, jaw tight, trying to process the events that had unfolded. Daniels broke the silence first, his voice barely a whisper. "Sir, we stopped him. We detained a living legend." Harris's hands clenched into fists. He had spent decades training for every scenario imaginable: combat, hostage situations, infiltration. But nothing had prepared him for this. They had misjudged the calm man in the truck, treated him like an ordinary traveler, and yet he had commanded respect from a four-star general with a single glance, a single movement. "We did exactly what protocol told us," Harris said, trying to justify their actions, though even he knew it was a weak defense. "We followed procedure. He stopped mid-sentence, realizing how hollow it sounded. Procedure alone had failed. Judgment, patience, understanding, these were the tools they had lacked. Daniels shook his head, eyes wide. "Sir, procedure doesn't matter when you're dealing with someone like him. He's not just a man. He's history in motion. Every mission he's ever led, every life he's saved, it's all here," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the dusty road. Harris exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of their mistake pressing down on him. "We assumed. That was the mistake. We assumed he was ordinary, and in doing so, we almost made a catastrophic error." The SEALs shifted uneasily, realizing the truth of his words. They had seen him as just another civilian, another truck to inspect, another stop on a routine mission. Yet they had ignored the subtle cues, the calm authority, the deliberate silence, the unflinching stare. Those cues had spoken volumes, but the team had been too rigid, too focused on procedure to notice. Daniels knelt briefly to brush some dust off the duffel bag. Even now, it seemed to hum with significance, as if the items within held the collective weight of decades of history and heroism. The sealed envelope marked classified remained untouched, a silent reminder of the power and responsibility they had nearly underestimated. Harris walked slowly to the truck, resting a hand on the door frame. His reflection shimmered faintly in the dusty glass, a mixture of regret, awe, and humility. "Think about it," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "Every decision we make has consequences. Even the smallest assumptions can lead to failure or worse." Daniels glanced at him, understanding the gravity of the lesson. "Sir, he didn't just command the general. He commanded respect with his presence alone. We could learn more from him in a single glance than in years of training." Harris nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth. They had been trained to respond to threats, to anticipate danger, to enforce protocol without hesitation. But they had not been trained to recognize authority that transcended rank, to read the silent power of experience and history. They had encountered something beyond the ordinary, and they had failed, however briefly, to see it. The heat of the desert seemed to intensify, each grain of sand a reminder of the unforgiving environment around them. Yet the lesson Harris felt pressing upon him was even heavier: humility. Even in positions of power, even in lives dedicated to service and combat, there were figures whose experience and legacy dwarfed their own. "Do you think he knew we'd stop him?" Daniels asked quietly, his voice tinged with awe. "Do you think it was a test?" Harris considered this, glancing down the dusty road where the convoy had disappeared. "I think he expected us to act according to our training," he said carefully. "But I also think he knew that training alone wouldn't prepare us for his presence. That patience, understanding, judgment, those are the tools we lacked, and in failing them, we learned the hard way." The SEALs fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. They replayed the events in their minds: the old man's calm demeanor, the duffel bag filled with relics of a storied past, the cryptic warnings over the radio, and the arrival of the four-star general who had saluted him with unmistakable respect. Every detail reinforced a single truth: they had encountered someone extraordinary, and their assumptions had nearly led to disaster. Harris's gaze returned to the truck. Dust clung to its rusted frame, but it seemed imbued with an energy that transcended its ordinary appearance. The medals, dog tags, and classified envelope inside were not just objects. They were symbols of a lifetime of service, courage, and wisdom that demanded recognition and humility. "Think about the missions we've trained for," Harris said slowly, voice tight with emotion. Every scenario, every drill, every strategy, none of it matters if we don't understand the human element. Judgment is everything. Respect is everything. And sometimes, even our best training isn't enough. Daniels nodded, swallowing hard. Sir, I think I understand. It's not just about procedure or protocol. It's about awareness, understanding who we're dealing with and respecting that. Harris's hand rested lightly on the duffel bag. Exactly. And the weight of that lesson that will stay with us forever. We were lucky this time. Lucky that our mistake didn't escalate. Lucky that he had the patience to let us learn and the general's authority to contain the situation. The SEALs remained in silence, letting the words sink in. The desert heat bore down, but the heavier heat of realization and humility pressed even more. They had encountered a living legend. They had misjudged him, and in doing so, they had learned a lesson far more important than any drill, any tactical maneuver, or any combat scenario. Daniels finally broke the silence. Sir, do you think we'll ever see him again? Harris shook his head slowly. I don't know, but whether we do or not, we'll carry what we've learned today with us. And that is more valuable than any medal, any mission, or any honor we could earn on our own. The wind picked up slightly, carrying sand across the checkpoint, swirling around the old truck and the duffel bag. For a brief moment, the desert seemed almost to shimmer, holding the memory of the extraordinary encounter. Harris and his team stood, absorbing the gravity of what had happened. The lesson was clear. Humility, patience, understanding, and respect were as crucial as any weapon or skill, and assumptions, however small, could carry consequences far beyond their comprehension. Finally, Harris took a deep breath and addressed his team. Let's pack up. We've learned more today than we ever could have imagined, and we need to make sure that lesson stays with us. As they moved to dismantle the checkpoint, the old truck sat quietly behind them, its presence lingering like a shadow of history. The road ahead was empty now, but the memory of what had transpired remained, heavy and undeniable. For the SEALs, the desert was no longer just a harsh landscape of sand and heat. It had become the stage for a profound lesson, one that would shape their understanding of authority, judgment, and respect for the rest of their lives. And in the back of their minds, the question lingered. What extraordinary life had that old man led to command respect from a four-star general? And what other stories, hidden and untold, had they almost disrupted through assumption and haste? Harris glanced at the dusty horizon, a deep sense of awe and humility settling over him. They had survived the encounter, but more importantly, they had learned from it. And the weight of that lesson, far heavier than any weapon or mission brief, would remain with them forever. The desert sun had begun its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows over the checkpoint. The once dense air had begun to lighten slightly, though the SEALs remained vigilant. Every instinct in their bodies was still alert, honed by years of combat and training, yet a new awareness had settled over them, a sense that today's encounter had been far beyond anything they had ever faced. Harris stood beside Daniels, hands on his hips, eyes scanning the empty road where the convoy had vanished. He could still feel the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders, the lesson of humility etched deep into his mind. You know, he said quietly, I've trained for situations like this for years. Hostages, ambushes, reconnaissance, but nothing could prepare me for that. Daniels nodded, the lines of tension still visible on his face. Sir, it wasn't just him. It was the way he carried himself. Calm, controlled, even with a four-star general standing before him. He didn't need to threaten anyone. He didn't even raise his voice. And yet he commanded respect. We missed that in our assumptions. Harris's gaze drifted to the empty truck, now just a relic of a moment that had forever altered their understanding of authority. We assumed he was just another civilian, a routine checkpoint stop, and we were wrong, dead wrong. For a long moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the soft whistle of the desert wind. Every SEAL on the team was processing the encounter differently, but all shared the same unspoken realization. They had been in the presence of someone extraordinary, someone whose life and achievements were beyond comprehension, and whose calm authority had overshadowed even the highest-ranking general in the military. Daniels finally spoke, voice quieter than before. "Sir, do you think he wanted us to stop him, or was this some kind of test?" Harris shook his head slowly, thinking carefully before answering. "I think he anticipated it, but I don't think it was a test in the way we think of them. He probably wanted us to see, to learn, to understand that authority, judgment, and respect aren't measured by rank, medals, or clearance. They're measured by patience, awareness, and understanding." The SEALs nodded, absorbing the gravity of the lesson. They had been trained to act decisively, to follow protocol without hesitation, but they had learned that there were moments when restraint, observation, and humility were far more powerful than any weapon. Daniels glanced at the duffel bag, which remained where it had been left. The sealed envelope, marked classified, seemed to pulse with significance, a symbol of responsibility and trust. Harris had not touched it, nor did he intend to. This wasn't a situation to be solved by force or curiosity. It was a lesson in judgment, and the envelope was a silent reminder of the boundaries they had almost crossed. Harris finally spoke, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "We've been given a rare gift today, a chance to witness authority, history, and integrity all in one person, and we nearly squandered it because we assumed appearances mattered more than substance." Daniels exhaled slowly. "Sir, I don't think I've ever been this humbled in my life, and it's uncomfortable, but I know it's a lesson we'll never forget." The sun dipped lower, casting a warm orange glow across the desert. The shadows of the SEALs stretched long and distorted, a visual reminder of how small they felt in comparison to the weight of the history they had encountered. Harris felt a mixture of awe and guilt. They had almost interfered with a man whose decisions, actions, and courage had saved countless lives, missions, and perhaps even the country itself. Harris's mind replayed the encounter, the calm stare of the old man, the quiet smile, the precise movements, the unshakable presence, and finally, the acknowledgement from the four-star general. Every detail reinforced a single, undeniable truth. Authority wasn't about asserting power. It was about being measured, deliberate, and commanding respect through wisdom and integrity rather than fear. Daniels broke the silence again, voice thoughtful. "Sir, do you think we'll ever meet someone like him again?" Harris shook his head slowly. "Maybe not, and maybe that's the point. This encounter was meant to teach us a lesson we couldn't learn any other way. We have to carry it forward in everything we do, from decisions in the field to how we treat those we encounter every day." A quiet wind blew across the checkpoint, rustling the sand and whispering through the empty vehicle frames. The old truck sat in silence, almost as if it were waiting for the next chapter in its story to unfold. Harris felt a pang of regret for how quickly they had judged its occupant, yet also gratitude for the rare insight they had been allowed. Daniels looked around at the team, all of whom were silent and introspective. "Sir, do you think he noticed how we reacted? All of our assumptions, our tension, our mistakes?" Harris considered the question carefully. "He probably did, and I imagine he was patient for that reason, to let us see the consequences of assumptions, to let us learn humility firsthand. That's how people like him operate. They teach through presence and example, not through force or words." The team's eyes lingered on the duffel bag one last time, recognizing it as more than a bag of old items. It was a symbol of responsibility, legacy, and trust, the tangible evidence of a life lived with courage, integrity, and service. Harris felt the lesson settling into him deeply, as if the desert itself had become a classroom, and the man they had stopped had been the teacher. "Let's pack up and move out," Harris finally said, his voice calm but firm. "We have work to do and lessons to carry forward. Remember this day. Remember him. And remember that judgment, patience, and respect are worth more than any protocol we follow blindly." Daniels nodded, finally smiling faintly despite the heat and exhaustion. "Sir, I'll never forget him, or this lesson, and I don't think any of us will." The sun continued to sink behind the horizon, casting long shadows over the checkpoint. The SEALs moved methodically, dismantling equipment and packing their gear, but the weight of what they had witnessed lingered in every step. Each movement carried reflection, humility, and awareness of the rare encounter they had been part of. Harris glanced at the road leading out of the desert, imagining the convoy already miles away, carrying the extraordinary figure who had taught them more in a single encounter than years of training ever could. The lesson was clear. Appearances are deceiving, authority is earned, and even the most routine operation can transform into a defining moment if approached without humility. As the team prepared to leave, Daniels turned to Harris one last time. "Sir, I think I understand now. It's not about our control over situations. It's about understanding the people involved, their history, their authority, their presence. That's what makes a true leader." Harris nodded, his eyes lingering on the empty horizon. "Exactly. And that lesson is worth more than anything we carry in our packs, our weapons, or our missions. We've seen the difference between authority and presence, between assumption and judgment, and we'll carry it forward every day in everything we do." The desert remained silent as the last rays of sunlight faded, leaving long shadows and a lingering sense of awe. The old man had departed, the four-star general's convoy long gone, but their presence, and the lessons they imparted, remained etched in the minds of the SEALs. For Harris and his team, the day would never be forgotten. They had stopped the wrong man. They had misjudged a legend, and in the process, they had learned a lesson about authority, judgment, and humility that would shape them for the rest of their lives. And as they prepared to leave the checkpoint, moving forward with a renewed sense of awareness and respect, Harris knew one thing with absolute certainty. Sometimes, the most extraordinary lessons come from the quietest, most unassuming sources, and failing to recognize them even briefly can teach you more than any drill ever could. The desert was quiet, save for the soft whisper of wind across the sand. The checkpoint, once a hive of tension and anticipation, now lay still under the fatting light of dusk. Harris and his team gathered their gear, each movement deliberate but heavy with reflection. The SEALs had spent years training for the unpredictable, yet nothing could have prepared them for the encounter they had just endured. Daniels walked beside Harris, his eyes scanning the horizon where the convoy had disappeared. "Sir, I can't stop thinking about him," he admitted quietly. "The way he moved, the way he carried himself, it's like he existed on a different plane of authority. Even the general, he showed respect, and we didn't even recognize him at first." Harris nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the lesson pressing down on him. "It's easy to misjudge people, Daniels. Easy to assume that authority is measured by rank or appearance, but sometimes it's far subtler, far more powerful." He paused, glancing toward the empty road. "We've been in the presence of a man whose life shaped missions, lives, and history in ways we can barely comprehend, and we almost interfered. We almost got in the way of legacy itself." The SEALs moved quietly, each lost in thought. The desert stretched endlessly around them, a landscape both harsh and indifferent, yet now somehow transformed. It had become more than sand and sun. It had become a classroom, and the extraordinary figure they had detained, however briefly, had been the teacher. Harris's gaze fell on the duffel bag they had left behind. Even in its dusty, weathered state, it seemed to hum with significance. The medals, dog tags, and sealed envelope were symbols of more than service. They were reminders of responsibility, discretion, and trust. They had almost mishandled it, almost failed to recognize the weight of history in their hands. Daniel spoke again, voice hushed. "Sir, do you think he forgives us for stopping him, for judging him so quickly?" Harris considered this, then shook his head slowly. "I think he does. That's part of what made him extraordinary. He understood that judgment is flawed, that assumptions are inevitable, but he also knew the value of letting others learn their lesson firsthand. He allowed us to see the consequences of our actions without letting it escalate. That's wisdom. A soft breeze carried dust across the checkpoint, shifting the light as the sun sank below the horizon. Shadows stretched long and distorted, like the echoes of the events they had witnessed. Harris felt a pang of humility. For all their training, experience, and discipline, they had been unprepared for this. They had assumed, misjudged, and almost faltered. But in doing so, they had been given an opportunity to grow, an invaluable lesson etched in a single, extraordinary encounter. The SEALs gathered around Harris as he addressed them. Listen closely. We've learned something today that no drill or protocol could ever teach. We've learned that appearances are deceptive, that authority is earned through experience, patience, and integrity, and that judgment must be tempered with understanding. Never forget that. Daniels nodded, absorbing every word. Sir, it's humbling, and it's uncomfortable, but I understand now. I understand the responsibility that comes with every decision we make and the importance of awareness beyond what we can see or assume. Harris's voice softened slightly. Exactly, and the lesson doesn't end here. Every encounter, every mission, every decision carries weight. Authority isn't about asserting power. It's about presence, patience, and respect. And sometimes, the quietest, most unassuming people are the ones who wield the greatest influence. The sun disappeared completely, leaving a sky streaked with deep oranges and purples. The desert cooled, shadows merging into darkness. The SEALs packed up the last of their equipment, each movement a reflection of their internal transformation. The day's events had shifted something fundamental in their understanding of command, legacy, and responsibility. Harris looked one final time down the empty road where the convoy had vanished. The memory of the old man's calm, deliberate movements, his measured words, and the quiet acknowledgement from the four-star general lingered vividly in his mind. This wasn't just an encounter, it was a defining moment, one that would influence their judgment for the rest of their careers. Daniel spoke again, his voice quieter now, almost reverent. Sir, do you think we'll ever know the full story? All the missions he's led, all the lives he saved? Harris shook his head slowly. Maybe not, and maybe that's the point. We don't need to know everything. What we need is to remember the lesson. Respect, judgment, patience, and humility matter more than we can measure. That's the legacy we carry forward from today. The SEALs began moving back toward their vehicles, each step deliberate, mindful of the lesson carved into their minds. Harris stayed behind for a moment, looking at the old truck one last time. Its faded paint, rusted edges, and dust-covered surface belied the extraordinary presence it had once held. He knew they had been witnesses to something rare, something monumental, and that recognition alone carried a responsibility far heavier than any weapon or tactical maneuver. Harris finally turned to his team, voice firm yet reflective. We've seen what it means to encounter true authority. We've learned what it means to misjudge. And we've been given the rarest of lessons, to understand that history isn't just written in books, it walks among us quietly, waiting for the right moment to teach us. The SEALs nodded, a mixture of awe, humility, and determination settling over them. The desert night enveloped them, stars emerging as silent witnesses to the extraordinary events that had unfolded. Harris felt a profound sense of closure, tempered with lingering awe. They had almost interfered, almost failed, yet the lesson they had learned would endure far beyond the desert, far beyond the checkpoint, far beyond themselves. Daniels looked at Harris one last time. Sir, I don't think any of us will ever forget him, or today. Harris smiled faintly, the weight of the moment settling deep into his chest. No, and we shouldn't. This is what it means to serve, not just with strength or training, but with awareness, patience, and respect for the people and the history around us. As the SEALs climbed into their vehicles and prepared to leave, Harris cast one final glance over the desert. The old truck remained in the fading light, empty and still, yet it seemed almost alive with memory, with authority, and with the silent weight of a lifetime of extraordinary service. The convoy, the four-star general, the old man, they were gone. But their presence, their lessons, and the indelible mark they left on the seals would remain forever. Harris exhaled slowly, feeling the desert wind brush against his face. "Let's move out," he said, voice calm but resolute. "Remember everything. Let today's lessons guide us in every mission, every encounter, and every decision from this day forward." And with that, the SEALs drove away from the checkpoint, leaving behind the empty truck, the fatting dust, and the profound echoes of a living legend. They had stopped the wrong man, learned the right lesson, and carried forward a wisdom that would shape them, and the missions they undertook for the rest of their lives. The desert night settled fully, stars shimmering above as if bearing witness. And somewhere out there, the old man continued his journey, a quiet force of authority, history, and wisdom, forever a legend and forever a teacher to those who had paused long enough to recognize him. For the SEALs, the encounter was over, but the lessons, etched into their very being, would never fade. They had learned the power of humility, the weight of judgment, and the profound truth that sometimes the quietest presence carries the loudest authority. And in the endless expanse of the desert, under the vast, starry sky, history had whispered its lessons, and the SEALs had finally understood.